The Thanksgiving turkey sat golden brown on our dining room table, surrounded by all the traditional fixings. Steam rose from the mashed potatoes I'd made from scratch at 6 a.m., and the green bean casserole, my grandmother's recipe that somehow became my responsibility to carry on, waited in the ceramic dish I'd bought specifically for family gatherings. 23 people filled our house that Thursday evening, the warm glow of candles casting everything in that perfect Norman Rockwell light. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching my family laugh and share stories, my hands still wrinkled from washing the serving dishes. Dad was holding court at the head of the table, gesturing wildly as he told everyone about his promotion to district manager. Mom beamed beside him, occasionally touching his arm with that proud wife gesture she'd perfected over 27 years of marriage. My older brother Tyler sat with his fiancée Jessica, both of them glowing with that pre-wedding happiness that made everyone around them smile. And there I was, Madison Harper, 25 years old, the family's quiet pillar of responsibility, picking up empty glasses and refilling water pitchers while everyone else enjoyed the meal I'd helped pay for, prepare, and serve. Madison's been such a blessing this year, Dad was saying to our neighbor Mrs. Chin, his voice carrying that tone of paternal pride that used to make my chest swell with warmth. Always taking care of us, you know. We're so fortunate to have such a generous daughter. I smiled and ducked back into the kitchen, hiding the way my face flushed with something that wasn't quite happiness anymore. Generous. That's what they called it when I worked 60-hour weeks between my banking job, freelance accounting, and weekend catering gigs just to keep our family afloat. Generous was covering the mortgage when Dad's commission check ran short. Generous was Tyler's car insurance, Mom's medical bills, and the vacation fund they'd started for next summer's family reunion. The kitchen counter was covered with receipts I'd need to organize later, evidence of another month where my own rent money had somehow found its way into their emergencies. My apartment landlord had already sent one late notice, but family came first. That's what we did in the Harper family. We took care of each other. Except when I really thought about it, the taking care seemed to flow in only one direction. I was loading the last of the dinner plates into the dishwasher when Mom appeared beside me, her face soft with that maternal concern that used to comfort me, but now felt somehow hollow. "Honey, you look exhausted," she said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "You've been working so hard lately." "I'm fine, Mom." I forced the same smile I'd been wearing for months. Just tired. "You know, you really should find some balance," she continued, completely missing the irony as she said it. "All this work, work, work. You're going to burn yourself out. You're too young to be this serious all the time." Before I could respond, Dad's voice boomed from the dining room. "Madison, your uncle's asking about that investment account thing you helped him set up. Come tell him about the returns." I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked back into the dining room, where Uncle Robert was indeed asking questions about the portfolio I'd researched and managed for him. For free, of course, because that's what family does. As I explained the quarterly returns and rebalancing strategy, I caught Tyler's eye across the table. He was scrolling through his phone, barely listening, probably looking at wedding venues that I'd inevitably help finance. "Madison's got such a head for numbers," Dad announced to the table. "We keep telling her she should start her own financial planning business, but she's too modest." Too modest. Not too broke from supporting everyone else's dreams to take risks with my own. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, familiar patterns of praise mixed with gentle dismissal. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one they could count on to handle the difficult stuff while they focused on the fun parts of life. And somewhere along the way, I'd stopped questioning whether this arrangement was fair. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone home and the leftovers were packed into containers, most of which would go home with Tyler and Jessica because young couples need all the help they can get, I sat at my laptop in my childhood bedroom, organizing receipts and updating the family budget spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for 3 years. Mom poked her head in around 10 o'clock. "Still working, sweetheart?" "Just finishing up the monthly reconciliation." I didn't look up from the screen. "Did you remember to submit that insurance claim for Dad's physical therapy?" "Oh, you handle all that stuff so much better than I do." She waved her hand dismissively. You know how hopeless I am with paperwork." She wasn't hopeless. She'd managed a successful real estate career for 15 years before Dad's promotion let her step back. But somehow, when it came to family finances, she'd developed selective incompetence that left everything on my shoulders. After she left, I stared at the numbers on my screen. In the past 6 months alone, I'd contributed $8,400 to various family needs. Tyler's engagement ring payment plan, Dad's truck repair, Mom's dental work, the new refrigerator when theirs died unexpectedly. Meanwhile, my own savings account sat at $247, and I'd been wearing the same 4 work outfits for 2 years because I couldn't afford to update my wardrobe. But this was temporary, I told myself. Dad's promotion would kick in with the new year, Tyler would be settled after the wedding, and things would balance out. They had to. The first crack in my carefully constructed rationalization came 3 weeks later, when Mom called me at work with news that made my stomach drop. "Honey, we have the most wonderful surprise. Tyler and Jessica want to move up their wedding date to February. Isn't that romantic? A Valentine's Day wedding." I gripped my phone tighter, my other hand frozen over the loan application I'd been reviewing for a client. "Mom, that's only 3 months away. What about all the planning, the venue deposits?" "Oh, we'll figure it out. That's what families do, right? We make things work." Her voice had that bright, determined quality that meant she'd already made decisions without consulting anyone about the practical details. "Jessica's parents are covering the reception, but we'll need to handle the church, flowers, photography, and of course, Tyler will need a proper suit. Nothing too expensive, just something nice." My mental calculator was already running numbers. Church rental, wedding flowers, professional photography, a decent suit for Tyler. We were looking at least $4,000, probably more. Money I didn't have, money the family didn't have, money that would somehow become my problem to solve. "Mom, I knew you'd be excited. Tyler's going to call you later about looking at photographers. You're so good at researching this stuff, and we trust your judgment completely." After she hung up, I sat in my cubicle staring at the loan application on my screen. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days helping other people make sound financial decisions, while my own life was a perfect example of everything I'd advise against. That evening, Tyler did call, not to ask if I could help, but to tell me what he needed. "Madison, hey, Mom said you're going to handle the wedding research stuff." "That's awesome, thanks." His voice was casual, like he was asking me to pick up coffee, not finance his wedding. "Jessica found this photographer she loves, but he's kind of pricey. Like, $3,000, but Mom said you'd figure out how to make it work. $3,000. More than twice my monthly take-home pay after taxes. Tyler, where are you guys thinking this money is going to come from? I don't know, the family fund or whatever. You handle all that financial stuff." He sounded genuinely confused, like money was some abstract concept that magically appeared when needed. "Dad said his promotion bonus should cover most of it, and you can just put the rest on that credit card you use for family stuff." The credit card that was already at 60% of its limit. The credit card whose monthly payments were stretching my budget past the breaking point. "What about your savings?" I asked carefully. "You and Jessica have been planning this wedding for over a year." "Well, yeah, but we used most of that for the down payment on the house. You know how it is. Young couples starting out need to invest in their future. Besides, this is family stuff. Mom always says family takes care of each other." Family takes care of each other, the phrase that had become the soundtrack of my financial ruin. Over the next month, the wedding expenses multiplied like rabbits. The church needed a security deposit. The flowers required a 50% down payment. Tyler decided he needed new shoes to go with the suit, and then new shirts, and then a watch, because a man should have a nice watch for his wedding day. Each expense came with the same casual assumption that I'd handle it, the same breezy confidence that money would materialize because it always had before. And each time, I found myself saying yes, transferring funds, putting charges on credit cards, because that's what the responsible daughter did. Meanwhile, my own life was falling apart in slow motion. I was eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights while my family posted photos of restaurant meals on social media. My car needed new tires, but that expense kept getting pushed back because Tyler's wedding photographer needed his deposit. I developed a stress headache that never quite went away, a constant throb behind my eyes that reminded me of all the numbers that didn't add up. The real breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in mid-January. I was at my parents' house, helping Mom address wedding invitations, when she made a comment that stopped me cold. "You know, Madison, I was talking to Mrs. Patterson today about Tyler's wedding, and she mentioned how lucky we are to have you helping out financially. She said not every family has someone so generous and selfless." I looked up from the invitation I'd been addressing. "What did you tell her?" "Oh, I just said that's what family does. We all contribute what we can." Mom's voice was light, casual, like she was discussing the weather. "Tyler contributes his time and energy, your father contributes his experience and wisdom, and you contribute your financial expertise." Financial expertise. That's what she called it when I worked myself into the ground to fund their dreams while my own life stagnated in a cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck survival. "Mom, do you realize how much I've contributed to Tyler's wedding so far?" She looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Well, no, I don't really keep track of those details. You handle all that so much better than I do. Why? Is there a problem?" A problem. As if my growing credit card debt and empty savings account were just minor inconveniences, rather than the natural result of 6 years of being the family ATM. "I've put $6,200 toward Tyler's wedding in the past month," I said quietly. "That's more than I make in 2 months after taxes." "Oh," Mom blinked, processing this information. "Well, that does sound like a lot when you put it that way. But honey, this is Tyler's wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. We all have to make sacrifices for the important things. All of us. Except Tyler wasn't making any sacrifices. He was getting his dream wedding while I figured out how to pay for it. Dad wasn't making sacrifices. His promotion bonus was safely tucked away for future investments. Mom wasn't making sacrifices. She just bought herself a new wardrobe for the various wedding events. No, when she said we all, she meant me. I was the one making sacrifices. I was always the one making sacrifices. The night that would change everything started like any other family gathering. Thanksgiving, 1 year after that golden-lit dinner where I'd still believed in the myth of mutual family support. This time, though, I was running on fumes. 6 years of being the family financial backup plan had left me hollow, exhausted, and barely keeping my head above water. I'd worked a double shift at the bank that day, stayed late to help a client restructure a loan, then spent 2 hours at home preparing the sweet potato casserole and cranberry sauce that had somehow become my assigned contributions to family holidays. My eyes burned with fatigue, my lower back ached from hunching over paperwork, and my hands shook slightly from the 3rd cup of coffee I'd needed to stay functional. But I was there, like always. Responsible Madison, reliable Madison, generous Madison. The house was full again. The same relatives, the same warm lighting, the same perfectly orchestrated domestic scene. Except this time I wasn't seeing it through the soft filter of family loyalty. This time I was calculating costs as I looked around the room. The wine everyone was enjoying, I'd bought it. The new dining room chairs that Mom was so proud of, my credit card. The beautiful flower arrangement centerpiece that everyone kept complimenting. Another one of my contributions to making sure everything looked perfect for the family gathering. I was arranging leftover turkey in containers when the conversation in the dining room caught my attention. Tyler was talking about his honeymoon plans, his voice animated with excitement. "We found this amazing resort in Costa Rica. It's all-inclusive right on the beach. The photos look incredible." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said. "You two deserve a beautiful honeymoon after all the stress of planning the wedding." "Yeah, we're really excited. It's a little pricey, but Madison said she'd help us out with it as a wedding gift." I froze, a piece of turkey halfway to the storage container. I had never said any such thing. In fact, I'd been deliberately avoiding conversations about the honeymoon because I knew exactly where they would lead. "That's so generous of Madison," Jessica chimed in. "I told Tyler we couldn't ask for anything that expensive, but he said his sister always comes through for family." Always comes through. Like I was some kind of miracle worker who could conjure money from thin air instead of a woman who was quietly drowning in debt to fund everyone else's happiness. I set down the turkey and walked into the dining room, my heart pounding with a mixture of exhaustion and growing anger. Tyler, I never said I'd pay for your honeymoon. The room went quiet. 23 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from surprise to confusion to the beginning of disapproval. Well, not exactly, Tyler said, his voice taking on that defensive tone he'd used since we were kids. But Mom said you were handling the wedding expenses, and we figured the honeymoon was part of that. You figured. The words came out sharper than I intended, but 6 years of swallowed frustration were starting to bubble up. You figured I'd just absorb another $4,000 expense without discussing it with me first. Madison. Dad's voice carried a warning tone I recognized from childhood. This is a family dinner. Let's not discuss money at the table. When should we discuss it, Dad? When should we talk about the fact that I've put $67,000 into this family over the past 6 years, while you all act like it's just appearing out of thin air? The number hung in the silence like a bomb. I'd never added it all up before, never let myself see the full scope of what I'd been doing. $67,000, more than twice my annual salary. Money that could have been my emergency fund, my house down payment, my graduate school tuition, my future. That's not accurate, Mom said weakly. You're being dramatic. I have every receipt, every bank statement, every credit card payment. My voice was steady now, driven by a cold fury that was more powerful than shouting. Tyler's wedding, Dad's truck repairs, Mom's dental work, the new refrigerator, the vacation fund, the emergency fund that's never for my emergencies, Uncle Robert's investment account setup, Cousin Sarah's graduation party, Christmas presents for 17 people because Madison's so good at finding the perfect gifts. Madison, stop! Dad's voice was sharp now, embarrassed. You're being inappropriate. Inappropriate? The word cracked something inside me. What's inappropriate is a 25-year-old woman eating ramen for dinner so her family can afford restaurant meals. What's inappropriate is maxing out credit cards to pay for other people's dreams while putting my own life on hold indefinitely. All you do is take, Dad said suddenly, his voice rising with his own anger. You've never given this family anything. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the table, I could see relatives looking uncomfortable, averting their eyes, but no one spoke up to contradict him. No one pointed out the irony of what he'd just said. No one defended me. All I do is take, I repeated slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. That's right. Dad was fully committed now, his face red with righteous indignation. You sit there complaining about money, acting like you're some kind of martyr, but what have you actually given us? What have you sacrificed for this family? The room was dead silent. Even Tyler had gone pale, finally understanding that something fundamental was breaking apart in front of everyone. But it was too late. The words were out there, hanging in the air like toxic smoke. I looked around the table at my family. These people I'd been killing myself to support. These people who saw my exhaustion and stress and somehow translated it into selfishness. These people who had watched me disappear piece by piece into their needs and decided I was the one who wasn't giving enough. You're right, I said finally, my voice eerily calm. I haven't given this family anything. I've never given you anything at all. I stood up, my hands surprisingly steady as I reached for my purse. Thank you for clarifying that for me, Dad. It's good to know where I stand. Madison, don't be so dramatic, Mom started, but I was already walking toward the door. Oh, I'm not being dramatic, I said without turning around. I'm being accurate, and you're about to find out exactly what I've never given this family. I drove home in silence, my mind strangely clear for the first time in years. The hurt was there, sharp and deep, but underneath it was something else, a cold, calculating rage that felt more productive than any emotion I'd experienced in a long time. At home, I sat at my laptop and opened my banking application. Every account, every automatic payment, every recurring transfer that had been bleeding me dry for 6 years. The mortgage payment that came out of my account on the 15th of every month. The utility bill that I'd somehow become responsible for. Tyler's car insurance, Mom and Dad's cell phone plan, the credit card payments for Dad's truck, the medical bill payment plans, the family vacation fund that would never include a vacation for me. $67,000 over 6 years, an average of $930 every single month, flowing from my accounts into their lives while I struggled to keep my own head above water. All I do is take. All I've never given this family anything. I started clicking, cancel automatic payment, cancel recurring transfer, remove authorized user access, close joint account. One by one, I dismantled the financial web that had been strangling me for so long. My phone started ringing around midnight, Mom first, then Tyler, then Dad. I let every call go to voicemail, then blocked their numbers without listening to the messages. Whatever they had to say, I'd heard enough for one lifetime. For the first time in 6 years, I fell asleep without calculating how much money I'd need to transfer in the morning to keep someone else's life running smoothly. And for the first time in 6 years, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic about bills that weren't even mine. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in over 2 years, and spent the day setting up a new bank account at a different institution. I changed my direct deposit, moved my small savings, and applied for a credit card that would be mine alone. No authorized users, no family access, no emergency backup for people who had never once asked if I needed emergency backup myself. By the end of the day, I had financially divorced my family as cleanly and completely as if I'd never been related to them at all. My phone, unblocked for practical purposes, buzzed with increasingly frantic messages. The first utility disconnection notice had apparently arrived. Dad's truck payment had been declined. Tyler's insurance had lapsed, but for the first time in years, none of those problems were mine to solve. I packed a bag, wrote a note to my landlord about being away for a few weeks, and drove to my college friend Nora's apartment 3 states away. I needed time to think, time to plan, and most importantly, time to be around people who had never seen me as a walking ATM. 3 weeks later, I came home to find 17 voicemails and 43 text messages waiting for me. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I drove slowly past my childhood home and saw something that made me smile for the first time in months. A bright orange foreclosure auction notice was taped to the front door. The foreclosure notice fluttered in the October wind, that bright orange paper looking almost festive against the familiar white door of my childhood home. I sat in my car across the street, engine running, watching that piece of paper dance like some kind of twisted celebration banner. 3 weeks ago, I would have been horrified by this sight. 3 weeks ago, I would have already been on the phone with mortgage companies, scrambling to find a solution, transferring what little money I had to prevent this exact scenario. Now, I felt nothing but a strange, hollow satisfaction. My phone buzzed with another call from Tyler. I glanced at the screen, call number 43 since I'd returned to town this morning, and sent it straight to voicemail with the rest. Whatever desperate explanations or furious accusations they wanted to hurl at me could wait. Right now, I needed to see this moment for what it truly was, the natural consequence of their choices catching up to them. I pulled away from the curb and drove to the coffee shop downtown, the one with reliable Wi-Fi and corner booths where I could work undisturbed. It was time to face the numbers, not theirs anymore, but mine. For the past 3 weeks at Nora's place in Denver, I'd been living in a strange kind of limbo. The guilt had been crushing at first, waves of it that left me nauseated and shaking. Every time I thought about the family I'd left behind, about the bills piling up, about the consequences of my sudden absence, that familiar voice in my head would start. This is your fault. You should fix this. Good daughters don't abandon their families. But Nora, bless her practical heart, had refused to let me drown in that familiar spiral. "Madison," she'd said on my second day there, finding me crying over my laptop as I calculated how much money I could scrape together to send home. "What exactly do you think you're guilty of? Not working yourself to death? Not funding other adults' irresponsible decisions? Not setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm? They're my family, I'd whispered. No, honey, family doesn't work like that. Family doesn't drain one person dry while everyone else lives comfortably. What you had wasn't a family. It was a financial abuse situation with holiday dinners. Financial abuse. The words had hit me like cold water. I'd never thought of it that way, never put that clinical term on the slow-motion destruction of my financial life. But as Nora helped me research the concept online, reading through articles and forum posts from other people who'd lived through similar situations, I started to recognize the patterns with terrifying clarity. The gradual normalization of unreasonable financial demands, the emotional manipulation that made me feel selfish for having boundaries, the way my family had positioned themselves as helpless while expecting me to be endlessly capable, the isolation that came from being too exhausted and broke to maintain friendships outside the family system. I'd been the victim of a kind of financial gaslighting that had convinced me I was the problem when I was actually the solution. Their solution to avoiding adult responsibility for their own lives. Now, sitting in the coffee shop with my laptop open, I was finally ready to see the full scope of what had been done to me. More importantly, I was ready to see what I was going to do about it. I opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting everything. Not just the $67,000 I'd thrown out during our Thanksgiving confrontation, but every single transaction, every favor, every unpaid hour of financial planning and administrative work I'd done for them over the past 6 years. Tyler's wedding expenses, $8,400 Dad's truck repairs and payments, $12,600 Mom's medical and dental bills, $6,800 family vacation fund that I never got to join, $40,200 Christmas and birthday gifts for extended family, $3,900 utility bills and home maintenance, $18,700 Tyler's car insurance, $7,200 emergency funds for various crises, $5,800. The list went on and on. By the time I finished, 3 hours later, the total came to $73,247, not including the interest I'd paid on credit cards used for their expenses, or the opportunity costs of investments I couldn't make, or the career advancement opportunities I'd missed because I was too exhausted from working multiple jobs to support them. $73,000. Enough for a house down payment. Enough for graduate school. Enough to start the financial planning business Dad had mentioned so casually, as if I'd been too modest to pursue it rather than too broke from funding their lives. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I'd lost of myself in the process. The person I'd been at 19, ambitious, optimistic, full of plans for my future, had been slowly cannibalized to feed their needs until nothing was left but an exhausted shell who couldn't even imagine what her own dreams might look like. Well, that person was waking up, and she was angry. I spent the next 2 hours researching financial abuse recovery and family estrangement support groups. I found forums full of people who'd been through similar situations, adult children who'd been treated as family ATMs, siblings who'd been designated as the responsible one, while everyone else got to be carefree and irresponsible, daughters and sons who'd been emotionally manipulated into sacrificing their futures for people who'd never shown them the same consideration. Reading their stories was like finding a mirror I hadn't known existed. The shame, the confusion, the way everyone outside the situation would say, "But they're your family," as if DNA was some kind of magical license for financial abuse. The relief of finally setting boundaries, and the fury that came with realizing how much life they'd lost to people who'd taken their sacrifice for granted. I joined 3 different support groups and spent the evening reading recovery strategies. The most important lesson seemed to be this: healing required staying strong in the face of the manipulation that would inevitably come. They would try guilt, anger, false promises of change, and eventually threats. The key was remembering that none of their emotional reactions were my responsibility to manage. My phone had been mercifully quiet during my research session, but as I packed up to leave the coffee shop, it started buzzing again. This time it wasn't Tyler or my parents. It was my Aunt Linda, Dad's sister. I hesitated, then answered. Aunt Linda had always been the reasonable one in the family, and I was curious what version of events had made it to the extended family. Madison, honey, I'm so glad you picked up. Her voice was warm but strained. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your parents are, well, they're very worried about you. I'm fine, Aunt Linda. Better than I've been in years, actually. Sweetheart, I don't know what happened at Thanksgiving, but walking away from family isn't the answer. Your parents love you, and they're sorry if they said something to hurt your feelings. Hurt my feelings, as if 6 years of financial exploitation were just a communication misunderstanding. Aunt Linda, are you aware of how much money I've contributed to my parents' household over the past 6 years? A pause. Well, no, Financial matters are private between family members, but I know you've always been generous, and your parents appreciate $73,000. I let that sink in for a moment. I've given them $73,000 while living paycheck to paycheck myself. That's not generosity, Aunt Linda. That's financial abuse. Another longer pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different. 73. Madison, are you sure about that number? I have documentation for every penny. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. I spent this afternoon putting together a complete record. I had no idea it was that much. Your father never, when he asked me to call, he made it sound like you'd had some kind of breakdown over a minor family disagreement. A minor family disagreement. Of course, that's how they'd framed it. Dad told me, in front of the entire family, that all I do is take and that I've never given them anything, after 6 years of funding their lifestyle while I ate ramen for dinner and couldn't afford new work clothes. My voice stayed steady, but I could hear the steel in it. So I decided to show him what it looks like when I actually don't give them anything. Oh, honey. Aunt Linda's voice was soft now, understanding. Oh, Madison, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what was really going on. Nobody did. They made sure of that. Every time someone complimented them on their financial stability or their generosity to Tyler, they just smiled and accepted the credit. They never mentioned that it was built on my credit cards and my exhaustion. We talked for another 20 minutes. Aunt Linda, it turned out, had her own concerns about my parents' financial management. She'd been puzzled by their ability to afford certain luxuries on Dad's salary, but had assumed they'd gotten better at budgeting. Learning that their lifestyle had been subsidized by their daughter's sacrifice explained a lot of things that hadn't made sense. By the end of the conversation, I had an ally I hadn't expected. More importantly, I had confirmation that my version of events would reach at least some members of the extended family unfiltered. The next morning, I drove past the house again. The foreclosure notice was still there, but now there were other signs of the financial reality I'd left them to face alone. The lawn, usually immaculately maintained by a service I'd been paying for, was overgrown and scattered with fallen leaves. Mail was spilling out of the box, probably disconnection notices and late payment warnings. Tyler's car wasn't in the driveway, which likely meant his insurance had lapsed and it wasn't legal to drive. I felt that same hollow satisfaction, mixed now with something that might have been sadness for the people they could have been if they'd ever learned to be responsible for their own choices. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Madison, this is Jessica. Please call me. Tyler is having panic attacks and your parents are talking about losing the house. I know you're upset, but please don't destroy the family over one argument. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the familiar tug of guilt trying to pull me back into the pattern. Jessica was nice enough, and she genuinely didn't understand what had been happening. She'd probably been told the same story as everyone else, that Madison had a breakdown over some minor slight and was now being vindictive and cruel. But I wasn't destroying the family. I was simply no longer preventing them from facing the consequences of their own financial decisions. The panic attacks and house troubles weren't caused by my absence. They were caused by 6 years of living beyond their means while counting on me to bridge the gap indefinitely. I blocked the number and drove to my apartment. The next few days brought an escalation in their attempts to contact me. When phone calls and texts didn't work, they tried email. When I didn't respond to emails, Mom showed up at my workplace. I was reviewing loan applications when the receptionist called my extension. Madison, there's a woman here asking to see you. Says she's your mother. Should I tell her I'm unavailable and ask her to leave? I said calmly. If she refuses, call security. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched Mom argue with the receptionist, her face red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She was wearing the new coat she'd bought for Tyler's wedding, paid for with my credit card. And the irony wasn't lost on me. She left without causing a scene, but not before leaving a handwritten note with the receptionist. I threw it away without reading it. That evening, Tyler tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment building and waited in the lobby until I came home from work. Madison, thank God. He stood up as I walked in, and I was shocked by how different he looked. Tyler had always been the golden boy, confident, well-groomed, casual in the way that came from never having to worry about money. Now he looked haggard, his clothes wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Tyler. I kept walking toward the elevator. You need to leave. Madison, please, just let me explain. He followed me, his voice desperate in a way I'd never heard before. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know how much you were. I knew you helped out, but I didn't realize. I pressed the elevator button and waited, not looking at him. The insurance on my car lapsed, he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. I had to take the bus to work, and my boss is asking questions about why I look like I haven't slept in weeks. Jessica's parents are asking questions about the wedding expenses, and I don't know what to tell them. Mom's been crying for 2 weeks straight, and Dad won't talk to anyone. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. Tyler moved to follow me, but I held up a hand. Tyler, stop. This isn't my problem to solve. But we're family. The words came out as almost a wail. You can't just abandon family. Family, I repeated, holding the elevator door open with one hand. When Dad told me I never give anything to this family, in front of everyone, did you correct him? Did you point out that I'd been funding your wedding, your insurance, your parents' lifestyle for years? Tyler's face went pale. It happened so fast and I was shocked. When Mom talks about how generous and selfless everyone in the family is, does she ever mention that the generosity comes from my bank account while everyone else gets to be selfless with my money? Madison, When you make plans that cost thousands of dollars, do you ever ask if I can afford it, or do you just assume I'll find a way to make it work? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's what I thought. I let go of the elevator door. You're not my family, Tyler. You're my financial dependents who happen to share my DNA, and I'm done being your ATM. The door closed on his stricken face. 3 weeks into my new life of financial independence, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. This time, when I answered, it was Dad's voice on the other end, but not the confident, authoritative tone I was used to. This was Dad sounding older, smaller, uncertain. Madison. He cleared his throat. We need to talk. No, we don't. Please, don't hang up. I wanted to apologize for what I said at dinner. I was wrong. I sat down on my couch, curious despite myself. This was new territory, Dad admitting he was wrong about anything. I've been going through the bills, he continued, his voice strained. I didn't realize. I knew you helped out sometimes, but I didn't understand the extent of it, the automatic payments, the credit card contributions, Jesus, Madison, you've been carrying us for years. Yes, I said simply. I have. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell us it was that much? The question was so absurd, I almost laughed. Dad, I tried to talk about money dozens of times. Every time I was told I was being dramatic, or that family takes care of each other, or that I was too young to understand real financial pressure. You didn't want to know the extent of it because that would have made it harder to take. A long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was thick. We're going to lose the house. I know. The auction is next week. I don't suppose there's any way you could... No. The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften it. No, Dad, I will not be bailing you out anymore. Not now, not ever. Madison, please. Your mother is... She's not handling this well. The stress is making her sick. And Tyler, he's... Tyler is an adult man whose wedding I funded while he spent his money on a house down payment. Mom is an adult woman who chose to spend money she didn't have because she assumed I'd cover the shortfall. You are an adult man who took my financial support for granted while insulting my character. The stress you're all feeling now, that's the stress I've been carrying alone for 6 years. We can change, he said desperately. We can do better. We can pay you back, set up payment plans. With what money? With what jobs? Tyler's working part-time retail, Mom hasn't worked in 3 years, and your promotion barely covers your own expenses when you actually have to pay them yourself. The harsh truth of it hung in the air between us. We made a mistake, he said finally. A big mistake, but you're our daughter. Doesn't that mean anything? For a moment, the old Madison stirred. The daughter who'd been trained to prioritize everyone else's comfort over her own well-being, who'd been conditioned to believe that love meant endless sacrifice without reciprocation, but that Madison had been slowly dying for years, suffocated under the weight of their expectations and demands. The woman I was becoming, the woman I should have been allowed to become 6 years ago, was stronger than their guilt trips. Being your daughter meant everything to me, I said quietly. That's why I gave you everything I had. But being my parents clearly didn't mean anything to you, or you never would have been content to watch me struggle while you lived comfortably off my sacrifice. Madison, the house goes to auction next week. Tyler's car has been repossessed. The utilities are shut off. Those are the natural consequences of the financial decisions you made, Dad. Not the result of my cruelty, but the result of your choices finally catching up to you. I hung up before he could respond. The auction was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I took the day off work, not to attend, but to be present for the end of an era. I drove to the Starbucks across the street from my childhood home and ordered a large coffee and a pastry I'd never been able to afford during my years of funding their lifestyle. At 10 a.m. sharp, a small crowd gathered on the front lawn. County officials, a few real estate investors, some neighbors who'd come to watch the spectacle. I could see my parents through the front window, their faces pressed against the glass like children watching the world end. The bidding was swift and brutal. The house sold for significantly less than they owed on it, which meant they'd still be responsible for the shortfall. My parents would emerge from this crisis not just homeless, but deeper in debt than when it started. I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. As the crowd dispersed and the new owners began discussing their plans for renovation, I watched my parents emerge from the front door, carrying suitcases and garbage bags full of their belongings. Tyler was there too, loading boxes into a rented moving truck with the defeated posture of someone who'd finally run out of other people's money to spend. They were moving in with Mom's sister in the next county, I'd heard through the family grapevine. Aunt Carol had made it clear this was a temporary arrangement, 6 months max, and they'd need to cover their own expenses and contribute to household costs. For the first time in their adult lives, they'd be forced to live within their actual means. 6 months later, I got a letter in the mail from Mom. Not a text or email or phone call, but an actual handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery I recognized from her desk drawer. Dear Madison, I know you probably won't read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away without opening it. But I needed to try to reach you one more time, not to ask for anything, but to tell you some things I should have said years ago. We were wrong, not just about the money, though we were catastrophically wrong about that too. We were wrong about you, about what family means, about what love looks like. I spent the last 6 months thinking about all the ways we failed you, not just the financial support we took for granted, but all the other ways we treated you like a resource instead of a person. The way we assigned you the role of family problem solver and then resented you when you couldn't solve every problem. The way we praised your generosity to other people while privately taking it for granted. The way we made you feel selfish for having any needs or boundaries of your own. Your father has gotten a second job. Tyler is working full-time and taking night classes to get his certification in HVAC repair. I've started working as a substitute teacher and I'm looking for something more permanent. We're living in a 2-bedroom apartment and splitting expenses 3 ways, and for the first time in years, we're actually talking to each other about money instead of just assuming someone else will handle it. I wish it hadn't taken losing everything to learn these lessons. I wish we could have been the family you deserved from the beginning. I wish I could give you back those 6 years you spent carrying burdens that should never have been yours. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you anymore. I'm finally learning that expecting things from you was part of the problem, but I wanted you to know that losing you was the thing that finally woke us up to what we'd become. I hope you're happy, sweetheart. I hope you're building the life you always deserved to have. And I hope someday, if you ever feel ready for it, we might find a way to have a relationship that's actually worthy of the daughter we're so lucky to have had. Love, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, sitting in my new apartment, a one-bedroom place I could afford comfortably now that I was only supporting myself. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow I'd chosen myself, and the furniture was a mix of thrift store finds and pieces I'd bought with my own money for my own happiness. The letter surprised me, not because of the apology. I'd expected they'd eventually realize the scope of what they'd lost, but because of the genuine insight it showed. Mom had identified specific patterns and behaviors, not just offered generic regret. She'd taken responsibility without making excuses or asking for anything in return. It was, possibly, the most mature communication I'd ever received from her. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer, not to ignore it, but to sit with it. Forgiveness, if it came at all, would be a long process. Trust would take even longer. But for the first time in months, I felt a small crack in the wall of anger I'd built around my heart. Maybe someday we could rebuild something, not the old dynamic of exploitation and resentment, but something healthier, something that honored both their growth and my boundaries. But that was a project for the future. Right now, I had my own life to build. I opened my laptop and began working on the business plan I'd started sketching out months ago. Harper Financial Planning, a service for people who needed help managing their money, setting boundaries, and building sustainable financial futures. My target clients would be people like I'd been, overwhelmed, exploited, convinced they were bad with money when they were actually just good at prioritizing other people's needs over their own. I had the expertise, earned through years of managing complex financial situations under pressure. I had the empathy, earned through my own painful experience with financial abuse. And I had something else now, too, the knowledge that I was worthy of prioritizing my own dreams, my own goals, my own happiness. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't watching them fail. The best revenge was finally succeeding.